Hello, friends. Today I'm here with my friend Jack Canfield, and Jack and I met maybe about, we were trying to figure 15 or 20 years ago for the first time. And he's had an incredible and profound effect on my life, and his writings have, as you know, I'm sure, co-author of Chicken Soup for the Soul and a whole variety of other books, including Success Principles, which was really powerful for me as well. First of all, Jack, thank you for taking the time this afternoon to be here.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Now, as we kind of start this out, typically we have this little routine that we work through that helps people get to know you a little bit better, which is a little unusual, which is, can you share with us 3 people that in your life you've strongly admired and some character traits of those people that make you strongly admire them?
Well, I'm going to combine 2 people into one and say Jesus and Buddha. And the reason for that is just a highest level of consciousness that I think people can attain to, and also unconditional love and equanimity and peace. And so those are qualities I aspire to. The second person that comes to mind, and I only had a few seconds to think about this, is Martin Luther King. And because of and I would say Gandhi as well, the 2 people there who just wanted to do something magnificently huge and make a big difference with a lot of people, not something small. And and put their life on the line in order to do that, in a nonviolent way. So I think that's the second person people. And the third that comes to mind is someone like Steve Jobs, who had a desire to create something in the world that would serve people more on the commercial side, because I do believe in capitalism and the ability to create things that make money, but also serve humanity. And I think he was someone who was committed to excellence and didn't let the old stand in the way of the new, and constantly wanted to upgrade and make a difference. So off the top of my head, those are the 3 people that come to mind.
Wow, and for folks that know me and have gone through this interview process or seen me do it, as you may know, Jack picked 2 of my people, which were Jesus and second being Martin Luther King. And my third is very similar to yours. My third is Leonardo da Vinci. So it's the innovator and creator. So
yeah, Leonardo da Vinci. I read his several books about him. What a cool guy. So yeah, I get it.
So one of the things that most people may not be aware of you is that you taught school for a long time, for a number of years, and you pivoted from that career and reinvented yourself. Could you tell us a little bit about kind of that before and after those 2 lives, and how that creation and that movement happened for you?
Well, my life purpose, as I understand it, is to inspire and empower people to live their highest vision in a context of love and joy, in harmony with the highest good of all concerned. And so when I was teaching high school in Chicago, it was an all-Black inner city school. I think we had 3 white students in the whole school. And I was inspired to help them believe in themselves, to build their self-esteem. I was there teaching history. That was my major in college, and went to the University of Chicago to learn how to be a history teacher. And so for me, what I learned very quickly is my kids weren't motivated. They weren't inspired. They didn't believe in themselves. They had low self-esteem, low self-confidence. That became more interesting to me than actually teaching history. Now, I did teach African-American history to help build their self-esteem, so they knew what was going on in the world. And we're seeing that coming back into vogue with the Black Lives Matter movement and all the stuff that went on in the last year and a half. But I think that for me, what I became fascinated with was, how do I move them psychologically? And I met a man named W. Clement Stone, who had a foundation in Chicago. He'd written a number of books, and one of them with Napoleon Hill, who wrote Think and Grow Rich, one of the classic all-time self-help books. So I started working with Stone and his foundation, primarily bringing that into my classroom. And then eventually the school system said, your kids are doing better than everyone else. Would you teach the other teachers what you're doing? That led to me working for the Stone Foundation, and then going around all around the Midwest, Michigan and Minnesota, Ohio, Indiana, et cetera, Illinois, teaching teachers workshops in this. And then eventually I left and went back to graduate school, got everything but my dissertation for a PhD in education. And then I started a retreat center doing work like transformational work for people, still doing a lot of work with the school systems, and kept doing that for years, and wrote a couple books about it, 100 Ways to Enhance Self-Concepts in the Classroom, things like that. But then what happened was as I was doing that work one year, I think it was 93, the Gulf War happened and all the money for education dried up. No schools were hiring you to come in and do in-services. They weren't sending people to conferences. So I said, we've got to pivot our company and make this work about the general public and teach this to people. And it was right about that same time when this one principal said, I want you to go over and do this for my husband's company. I was teaching a self-esteem workshop. I said, I never worked in a company. I worked as a floor sweeper in a General Electric plant between college and graduate school. So that's my experience with that. She said, they're just big kids in suits. Now you go over and work with them. So I did, and it worked out really well. They got the value of it. I started writing books and things for adults, and that's kind of how the pivot occurred. And then I wrote the Success Principles book about 15 years ago, I think. And that took off, sold millions of copies around the world, and kind of made me more of an expert in that arena for sure.
Well, talk to me a little bit about adversity and adversity you've experienced, because I think when folks meet and get to know someone who has had any level of notoriety, they think it's been smooth the whole way, and they think it's an easy ride every day for you now. And as you and I both know, it's not. It's that we all have our issues in life, but tell me a little bit about the first big adversities you had and how you got through them and how you came to find the law of attraction, which I know you're very familiar with and pretty famous for teaching.
Sure. Well, my adversities were always kind of mixed with opportunities at the same time. And for me, I think the first adversity was my first father was a violent alcoholic when he drank. So my mom divorced him when I was 6. And then we lived with my grandmother for a couple of years in her attic. So, that was the first thing. It was like, it wasn't Anne Frank, but, we were living up in the attic. We didn't have the normal kind of place that kids had to play. And I didn't have a dad. And my mom was somewhat upset, with all of that. Obviously, she was going through a lot of depression and grief as a result of the divorce. And then I had a very fortunate event that my aunt was very wealthy. And she sent me to a private military school. I was a day student for 8 years, from 5th grade to high school. But the adversity there was they were rich and I was poor. And so I would always bring my lunch to school in a bag. They would always go through the cafeteria and buy these amazing lunches. And I would just get a little bottle of milk or a carton of milk back then. And I always felt like I was less than. I didn't belong, kind of, And then I got a scholarship to go to Harvard, which again, sounds like great. But then I was amid all these rich kids again who'd gone to private schools. And, they had names like Larry Rockefeller and Max Factor III, John Hopkins IV, unlimited amounts of money. And I'm working on the crew that's cleaning their bathrooms, and cutting the grass in the summer, So again, it was a great education, but I always felt like I didn't quite belong. And then I went to Chicago. And while I was in graduate school, I had no money. And so I was getting $120 every 2 weeks to be a half-time teacher in this local high school. And my rent was $79 a month. So for the first 2 weeks, I had about $50 to live on, which meant I was eating these, I called them my 29-cent dinners. It was a 10-cent can of tomato paste and 11-cent tube of spaghetti noodles, kind of like ramen noodles would be today. And I put a garlic salt and water and added that up, and that's what I would eat, So, and I had a Murphy bed that came out of the wall. And then behind that, my clothes would hang. I had a 2-burner electric hot plate, a little refrigerator about the size of what you get in a mini bar in a hotel. And that was my reality. And so I couldn't go out on dates. I didn't have the money to do that and to buy any alcohol or whatever. So it was pretty lean. And yet that's when I discovered W. Clement Stone. And he started teaching these success principles, and I began to believe them and practice them. And eventually he challenged me to make $100,000 in 1 year. Now you got to remember, this was after that 2 years of working in these schools. Now I'm making $8,000 a year working at a Job Corps center for kids who dropped out of school. And now he said, make $100,000 in a year. If you do what I teach you. I said, that's 12 times what I'm doing. How's that going to happen? He said, just visualize it, do the affirmations, do the visualization, act as if, all the things we teach, the law of attraction, which you just mentioned. So I started doing the things the law of attraction teaches, acting as if, believing it was possible, visualizing it, raising my vibration to a higher level and so forth. And I made $93,238. But I wasn't like I didn't fail. I had like almost 12 times my income, So my wife at the time said, you think it'd work for $1 million? I said, well, it seemed to work for 100,000. So we put $1 million bill on the ceiling. We drew it because it was before the motivational speakers were handing out those, $1 million bills.
Yeah.
And we started visualizing that and doing our affirmation. I'm so happy and grateful. I'm earning $1 million a year. And within a few years, didn't happen overnight, I got my first check for $1,138,238. And it was like, okay, this stuff works. Now, I've had 2 divorces in my life. One was a 5-year marriage. I never should have got married, but I was like, if you ever saw the movie The Graduate, and he drives off on the moped. I didn't do that. I got married instead. I knew I was not supposed to do it, but I couldn't call off the wedding. My self-esteem was a little low. And so 5 years, but I'm glad I have 2 great sons from that and a great grandson. And then I was married for 20 years, and that was good for about 17 years, and we just drifted apart. But the divorce was horrendous in terms of I lost pretty much half of everything I owned, which I built up this huge. I was worth about $20 million. But my wife got to take all the money and I got to keep my job because that's how they did the forensic side. The accountants basically said, your company's worth this, your wife gets everything else. And I couldn't sell my company, didn't want to. So I'm wearing shirts like 3 days in a row. Which you can do now with COVID because no one can smell you,
Right.
just iron them again,
There's no marketability discount in a divorce either.
That's
no one wants to buy your company. Right. So
that's right.
I get it.
Wow. And it's tough on the brand. You're teaching success and you've been married 3 times. What's going on here, But I've been married for over 20 years in my 3rd marriage. We're very, very, very happy. But, challenges all along the way, no question. And then when COVID hit, we had about $800,000 in deposits for live trainings, and all of a sudden can't do live trainings. So people either want their money back or we've got to figure out how to pivot them in the online courses, which we did for most people. It was challenging. We had to get a payroll protection plan loan, and all my staff had to be willing to take a pay cut if necessary. We didn't want to fire anybody, but we pulled it off. We're still here. We're doing fine. And I like to talk about the new better rather than the new normal, because we now are doing a lot of things online. We have a program we're about to do. It's 3 days. It's virtual, but it's like, I don't know if you saw this. Tony Robbins did that thing with 40,000 people.
Oh yeah.
So we're using that same company, and we'll probably have closer to 1,000. But we'll have people from 47 countries show up where they wouldn't have flown to LA for a live seminar. So we're reaching more people in more parts of the world with, that cost them less because our expenses are less. So It's all working out. But that was a challenging, I would say last year from March to June was definitely the hardest I've ever worked in my adult life.
Yeah, I think it's been a real tweak to a lot of people's businesses. But the folks that have something truly valuable that changes the world or changes people's lives, the brands are always going to find a way. And these folks are clever. It was fun to watch Tony do that. I have an association with Bill Guthrie and Greg Renker, who have an interest with one of Tony's businesses from long ago. And I kind of keep track of him, and watching him do that, I was like, okay, that's pretty brilliant. Now I'm thrilled to hear you're doing that. Tell me, what is, in your estimation, and we'll go to a solution too, kind of the problem or stack of problems in the world and the solutions, because I think people can if you get overwhelmed by the news, it's really easy to, like, if you look at, who's doing an arms buildup today and who's in this trade agreement and where we are with vaccines and where we are with COVID, like, you can get really overwhelmed with data input of, holy smokes, there's just too many topics and not a lot of them are great. And how does an individual, in your mind, who's getting inundated with that media cope, and what are some actions they can take that, and I was so glad to hear you talk about the principles of law of attraction and the success principles the way you did, because you don't just talk about writing checks and putting them on the wall. You talk about taking the action, of putting the traction in the action. What are some things that folks can do right now in this moment? Because we do probably all have a little more time on our hands than we did.
Yeah, I think, look, here's the deal. You can't solve every problem in the world. And you can't work on every problem in the world. You have to decide. One of the things that really changed my life was someone asked Ram Dass, who was a spiritual teacher way back when, they asked him this question. They said, I'm in India, and everywhere I look, there's all these children that are homeless, they're starving. He said, there's so many of them. What do I do? And he said, one of them will capture your heart. And that's the child you need to work with. Or there'll be one orphanage that captures your heart, or one cause that captures your heart. And so you have to kind of go with that. You know, like I think all the issues need to be addressed, whether it's the nuclear arms race, whether it's the melting of the ice caps, it's the plastic in the ocean, it's the food that we're eating, it's all denatured and over pesticized and all that. But you can't do it all. But on a personal level, I eat organic food as much as possible. So I'm not supporting big pharma. I'm doing a lot of things to, with essential oils and herbs and keeping myself healthy that way. I'm not going to bring down some of these companies that I think are, corrupt. I am working on, I support causes I care with checks, I vote, but I'm not taking on everything. You can't do it. And so, I'm not doing anything to solve the opioid crisis in Appalachia, for example. Just this one thing. There are people who work on that, and thank God they do. So what you have to do is say, okay, what do I feel attracted to do? What if I feel drawn to do? I mean, the mother whose daughter was overrun by a car of a drunk driver started MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. That became her cause, if you will. So I have certain charities I give to and certain causes I volunteer for, and that's it. And I give away 10 free talks a year. That's my tithing of my professional life, usually to things in the local area, to things like girls clubs and boys clubs and women's and entrepreneurial groups or helping women get out of poverty and so forth. And then you have to let it go. And I agree, the news can overwhelm you. And I say, if you can't stay neutral when you watch the news, you should stop watching the news, because you don't want your vibration to go down, because then you feel overwhelmed and depressed. And I think the other thing you said, and I will expand on it, is that you can visualize a world that works. You can at least add your intention to focusing on the outcome you want rather than focusing on what's not working, because that's just increasing the energy for it not working. And so we know that the more we focus on what we want for ourselves, for our family, for our community, for the world, actually has a movement and energy toward that.
Yeah, for us, I think that ties into the kind of the thought that we came up with when we created Intellihelp was we knew that there were people at home, whether they be seniors or single mothers or small families or whatever, people with pets even. We have a pets division where people would not have a job suddenly. They'd paid their rent, probably made their car payment, and they'd never been laid off before. They didn't even know how the unemployment system worked. And you have this whole rash of people that were out of work, and then you had a lockdown on top of it, and stores were closed, and it's all the whole mayhem of it. And this really came out of a need. And I thought, gosh, what would be simple? Because simple solutions usually work. And it was this idea of, hey, someone can go on Facebook or on this app and post what they need, and another person can come in and actually give it to them. But the act of meeting the giver and meeting the recipient was this idea of you're doing the giver a favor too, because you're empowering them to do something, which is huge. And I think that people miss that. And you're one of the people that taught that to me. So that's why I reached out to you, and I'm so thrilled that you said yes. This idea of taking action and not feeling a victim of your world, but realizing you could fall into victimhood, but take a step, small step. Feed like the Ram Dass. You can't feed all the kids, but feed the one kid. Find the one you can.
Right. And I think what you're doing is great, because I remember when I was running around the schools doing in-service trainings, that there was a lot of need. There's just a lot of ignorance about psychological issues, about personal development that needed to be in the schools. And there were all these people, the Brian Tracy's and the Jim Rohns of the world, and all these people, Tony Robbins and so forth, who had something to offer. And I realized most of these schools would never ask them, because one, they didn't even know they existed, because most people weren't even aware of it. And if they did, they felt like, well, why would they ever come to my school, in Riverside or something to do that? And so I put together, and I wrote up to a lot of people. I said, if you were asked, would you say yes to 10 days a year free to these schools? Everyone said yes. Then it was just a matter of match up the schools with the people. So a lot of times people want to help. I see this a lot. People look at Africa and they say all these kids are starving. They want to do something. They don't know what to do. They don't know which group to support, where they should send their money, who can they trust. No one's asking them. And so basically by lining up the giver and the receiver so that those can happen, it can be very specific and very personal. So people feel like they made a difference. I think it's brilliant. We saw that here in Santa Barbara where I live, that as soon as the pandemic hit and the older people couldn't go out, there were a bunch of high school kids who weren't going to high school and had cars. And they said, basically, we're going to write all the people, they put it in the paper, they put it online. We will go and we'll pick up your groceries for you. We will go and pick up your medicines for you. And they did it as a volunteer service. And pretty soon it spread to like about 12 or 15 cities, just these high school kids. And then now it's turned into a business. So these kids started out as a service, and then it turned into something they actually can do as a career to be in service as the pandemic comes to an end. So it's amazing what's possible.
Yeah, and hopefully it is coming to an end. It's such a crazy world, and it changes every day. But it's I think we're getting on track. Hopefully, we're getting on track. The thing that a person says before they put you on the spot is, "I hate to put you on the spot." So now that I've said that, I had JJ Virgin on yesterday, and she said she was at a conference with you maybe in the last week or two, and then you told a story you'd never told before. And she wouldn't tell me what the story was. So now I'm putting you on the spot and wondering, one, you can recall it? Because I go and do things and I'm like, what was that thing I said? I'm not sure. So if that's the case, that's fine. But if you can,
I have no idea what that was. I mean,
okay.
I'm sure I did, but I don't know.
No worries. Any last message or forward thinking that you'd like to give to our audience or any folks that are listening that feel stuck and feel an impending sense of doom? Because for so many people, that's where they are mentally when they get to the newspaper. And we need the sage advice of the sage members of our tribe, and that is definitely you.
Well, I'd say that I don't know that there's ever a time to feel an impending sense of doom. I mean, I guess I'm thinking of my good friend who was living up in the San Rafael area when the fires happened up there. Mm-hmm. And he and his wife woke up at 3 a.m. They thought it was dawn because it was so bright. And they discovered that this fire was moving toward them. And they later found out that fire was moving at the rate of 3 football fields a minute. Oh. So imagine it's coming at you with these huge, like 50 and 60 mile winds. They said they grabbed they left their house in their pajamas. They grabbed their laptops, and their wallets and their purses, and they ran to the car. As they were leaving their property, the flames were licking at the paint of their car. It left the paint blistered. They had to leave their cats because their cats were in the garage. They would have died otherwise. Now, that's an impending sense of doom. If you had that feeling, I'm with you. However, most of us are thinking about things that are off in the future, whether it's, losing our house, losing our mortgage, losing our job, getting COVID, whatever it might be. But the fact is, it hasn't really happened yet. And most things that we think are so terrible are survivable. Think of the people that are the refugees from Lebanon and the refugees from Yemen and the refugees from all these different places in the Middle East who are living in these camps. None of us are experiencing that much doom. And even if it gets bad, there's some place we can go, whether it's a shelter, a relative, maybe we lose the big screen TV, or maybe we lose, the meals we thought we were eating, or we have to give the car back or whatever, but we're not going to die. And so it doesn't serve you to have those thoughts. And basically, I always tell people, belief is a choice. I can choose to believe anything I want. It's simply a belief. And so believe it's going to work out, and believe you're going to survive whatever it is. Byron Katie, I don't know if you've ever had her on your show. She's an amazing woman. You should do it if you haven't.
She comes up all the time. I just did a post about her, and I've Daniel Amen introduced me to her. I've had dinner with her a number of times, and she's wonderful.
Yeah. And one of the things, I watched her process one of my friends in a workshop that I went to with her, and she was saying, well, what would happen then? Well, then I'd probably lose my home. Well, where would you be then? Well, I'd be sitting on the curb with all my stuff. And then what would happen? Well, I'd probably call my cousin. Then what would happen? He'd come pick me up. Then what would happen? Well, I'd probably have to live in his basement. Well, then what would happen? And she just kept going, and it never got to the end where she's going to die, but it feels like you're going to die. And so I would just suggest, and and it might sound like it's easy for me to say because I live in a nice house and I do have a nice, pretty well, good life at the moment. But as we said, it always wasn't that way. But the idea is it never serves you to go down the gloom and doom lane. It just doesn't do it. If you want to make it, here's just a little experiment for everybody. You can simply close your eyes sometime today for about a minute and think of all the good things that have ever happened to you and notice how you feel after that in your body. Then think of all the bad things you ever thought were bad and what happened to you and notice how you feel in your body. And you'll realize those thoughts actually make you feel really crappy. And so when you're thinking those bad things are going to happen in the future, that's going to make you feel crappy. And that leads to dis-ease. It lowers your immune system, which is something you don't want right now. And it also shuts down the prefrontal cortex in your brain, puts all the energy in the amygdala in the back, which is where fear lives. You cannot think creatively when your prefrontal cortex is shut down. So all that works against you, even coming up with ideas of how to survive whatever it is you think you're confronting. So it's just not a good use of your time. And so my final thought would be, look, every situation is survivable. Think of the fact that you're still here, which means you've survived everything that's ever happened to you. You have survived everything that's ever happened to you. And you could all tell me terrible things, and you'll survive this. And the other thing is you have within you the capacity to achieve any dream you want. Because I'm now convinced after I'm 76, I've been doing this since my 20s, 56 years, that you have the talents and you have the knowledge that you need more knowledge, you need to develop some skills, but you have the capacity to learn to do anything you want to do and have that goal become a reality. I've learned this. You're never given a dream that you can't fulfill. It doesn't occur to you. It won't come into your consciousness in order to do it if you don't have the capacity to do it. It's wired up that way in your DNA. So trust that you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, and stagnation is actually impossible. Things aren't going to change. You're going to change if you select the change and create the change to a change that you want to have happen. You're going to have happiness in the process. Happiness isn't a goal. It's something that happens along the way. It's a moment that happens along the way. And you may not have happiness constant, but you can live joyfully constant and have moments of happiness within that. So I really appreciate that outlook.
Yeah, I think Shakespeare once said, you can either be dragged through life or you can intentionally walk through life. You're going to get to the same place pretty much anyway, And one thing that's been really helpful to me lately is the phrase, and I believe it's true, the universe is not happening to you. Everything that's happening is happening for you. So at the time, it feels like it's awful, but we're being asked to develop strength, courage, perseverance, patience, the willingness to ask for what we need, the willingness to read. We're part of a community that we need help. We can ask for help. We can give service. We can step up. We are of value. So those are qualities that you only learn when you're being pressed by reality. Like steel gets tempered, and before it can become a knife, or the knife will break. And so it has to be stressed in order to become strong. Same with lifting weights. You have to stress the muscle. So it rips a little bit, builds more muscle in the rips. Now your muscles are bigger. Without that stress, there's no growth.
Well, for many people, this will be the first time they've actually ever encountered you, which, as shocking as that sounds, there's lots of people that haven't encountered you. How can people get more of Jack Canfield?
Well, a couple of ways. And this is not self-serving at all, but I have a book called The Success Principles, How to Get From Where You Are to Where You Want to Be. And you can get that on Amazon.com.
It's a fabulous book. It is a fabulous book. It's one of my favorite books.
Yeah, it really should be in everybody's library. It's a basic book. The second thing is you go to my website, jackcanfield.com, CANFIELD, jackcanfield.com. We have seminars, we have webinars, we have free stuff that's available. I have a YouTube channel that people can go to and get information on. We do regular podcasts and blogs, and we also have some audio programs. We have some home study courses and live trainings we do. So my commitment is to help people live the life they dream of. So if you want more of something and you're not happy with what you currently have, you probably wouldn't be listening to this if everything was working perfectly. You'd be out enjoying it more. But the fact is, we all want more. We want more love. We want more happiness. We want more joy. We want more significance, more meaning, more relational intimacy, etc. I would love to help you do that. So jackcanfield.com. The book's called The Success Principles.
Thank you, Jack. One of the reasons I have that fun little game at the beginning of you describing the people you admire and the character traits is it's very difficult for us to talk about who we are rapidly and let people know who we are in terms of our character traits. And all of those character traits that you reflected in your folks were your character traits, and I know them to be. And
no, thank you very much.
I really appreciate you taking the time. And I'm sure people will be reaching out to look for more information from you and more learning from you, because you're really a person that we can all learn a lot from, and I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too. And I'm going to ask you a question before we leave. You have a bunch of look like flags behind you. Can you tell me what all that is? I'm curious.
So you are talking to us from the Swiss consulate here in Austin, Texas. Once upon a time, our house was called Camp Run Amok, and our kids ran amok, and then they got a little older. And there was I'll say in our neighborhood, there was a little bit of a feud between a few neighbors, and we decided we'd be Switzerland. So we became the Swiss consulate, and based on an Eddie Izzard joke of how the English took over the world with the cunning use of flags and plaques, we got ourselves a flag and a plaque and put it on the front of the house. And I went to Google Maps back when you could, and I pinned us as the Swiss consulate, which it still is. And we became the place where people would come and have a cocktail and break bread and make peace. And they had to leave their differences aside. And then holidays started rolling through, and we decided to start getting secondary flags. So we'd have the Swiss flag and the American flag, or the Swiss flag and the Irish flag. So we always have two flags flying in front of the house. Right now we actually have, I think, the Vatican flag and the Swiss flag. And we started, then we became flag collectors. So then it just seemed like a great backdrop, because it really represents the world now. Intellihelp's in 10, 12 countries, and our businesses are all over the world, not unlike yours. And it seemed like a way to be officially friendly.
I love it. I'm just so glad I asked the question.
Thank you. People wonder. No, not a lot of people ask, so I appreciate that. And thanks again.
All right, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.